That's when you just stuff on that. You have to ask. I had to think about that. So you'll reach out to them. Like, on Instagram. So they found that. So.
Good afternoon.
How's it going?
Oh, not too bad. Trying to make money.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to arm you with information so you can go out and make more.
Oh, I love these classes, the forms ones, because that's what I'm most nervous about. As soon as I get my first sale, hopefully soon.
Good.
So I'll be attending these probably every week, just until I start doing it myself.
Good. Good plan. Good to know. Good, maybe another 2 minutes here and we'll get started. This requires me to let people in the door, so to speak. You know, I've got to, so the names come up, people who sign in, I have to click in to admit, you know, before they can come in. If they're late, sometimes I get carried away and I don't notice it, you know, and people are locked out.
Sorry, my rule of thumb has always been, if you're not early, you're late.
Yeah, it's a good rule.
Hey John, I'm gonna have to use my desktop PC, which doesn't have a camera.
Raquana, you got a camera that you can use so we can see you? John, do you have a camera that so we can see you also?
Don't worry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, last week I kept on lagging in and out of it. I think my Wi-Fi is bad or something, but my desktop is plugged straight into the internet. Shouldn't be an issue.
Well, we are 2 o'clock, so everyone's rushing in to join us now at 2, so that's great. Glad to have everyone here. And so if you are able to, I know that sometimes you're not, but if you are able to, use your camera video so I can see you. It's hard for me to teach. It's just a name on a screen. So if you're able to use your camera, I really appreciate that. And then you know, volume's up to you. And of course, if you have distractions around you and things like that, I'll leave that up to you, how you want to handle that. But I want to be able to answer your questions as quickly as possible as they come. So I want to be able to see you or have you be able to talk, you know. So This is Forms Mastery 1, Part 2. And so of the 4 Forms Mastery classes I do each month, this is the second. If you're keeping track for your clock hours, because if you do all 4, you get 8 clock hours. So Goldie's keeping track. These are being recorded, and she's keeping track and able to, get you your clock hours when they're due. So if you need a certificate, just get a hold of Goldie, and Goldie can get you your certificate for your attendance to these. And so I appreciate all of you being here. We got a nice group of 9 today. That's terrific. Again, if you're able to put on your camera video, I really would appreciate that. If not, I do understand that sometimes, there's distractions around you, and that's okay. I'll let you be the judge of that. So we left off in this Forms Mastery 1 class. We're going over Form 21, the purchase and sale contract. If you don't have Form 21, you'll want to pull up Form 21 from the Northwest MLS site or wherever you can get it, so you can follow along with what I'm covering. We left off last week finishing up number 8 on the front page of Form 21, which is for default, being either the forfeiture of earnest money only as the sole and exclusive remedy available to the seller, or the box that says seller's election of remedies. Okay, and those are in paragraph O of page 5, labeled small number 1 and small number 2 there. And so, so we'll pick up from there and start in on the number 9, which is the title insurance company. So your purchase and sale contract, Form 21, is 6 pages. The front page looks like this and has the fill in the blank stuff. And the other 5 pages are pre-printed, and they're pre-printed by lawyers for the purpose of, or pre-approved by lawyers for the purpose of making sure that buyers and sellers are both protected, right? So when we have the temptation to want to cross stuff off, line stuff off, okay, we're engaging in the unauthorized practice of law. Just to remind you about that. Remember, Colton versus Heritage House allows us to not be lawyers, yet practice law to the degree that we are just filling in blanks on forms that have been pre-approved by lawyers, right? So, so when we start to line stuff out, okay, we're venturing into that area of unauthorized practice of law, and we want to be a little bit careful about that. And sometimes agents unwittingly, I'll say, are encouraging on their listings, encouraging offers and buyers agents to line certain things out or cross certain things out on the contract that they think is going to help their seller, but is actually going to work as a long-term detriment to their seller, at least for the 6 years of the statute of limitations here in Washington State, following discovery of whatever it is. So we would want to give our sellers, if we were the listing agent, we would want to give them advice that post-closing, to avoid getting served papers someday in the next 6 years, they might want to give the buyer their due diligence period. Courts in Washington State have been ruling very, very strongly that when a seller gives a buyer their due diligence to check things out, that seller is going to be basically immune to lawsuits on those matters after closing. Why would we want to take that away from our seller? I mean, to me, it's just seems really stupid. But in the immediate moment, I guess, you know, making sure a deal closes, a listing agent thinks that somehow it's going to be a really good thing for their seller to have the buyer not doing their due diligences, you know, so they can't get out of the transaction. But if I was selling my house, knowing what I know about the law, I would definitely want my buyer to exhaust all their due diligences. You know, I'd give them 10 days, inspect everything, review the statements I've made, go over my Form 17, do all these things, look at the title report. I want you to feel comfortable closing. Because if I do that after closing for 6 years, which is the statute of limitations in Washington state under contract law, I'm going to be immune from lawsuits. And I kind of like that. Kind of like that idea. But see, so when I see listing agents putting in, you know, remarks in their listings and things that, you know, your offer's probably going to have a better chance of being accepted if you do the following, and they'll say line out paragraph W of page 5. I just think that's pretty dumb. And so we have a lot of monkey see, monkey do in our industry. And what I mean by that is that one person sees someone else doing it and they think that must be the way to do it. You know, and not usually not. You know, you would want to, if you have questions about things, you would want to ask. If you have a mentor, your mentor, coach, ask your coach, ask me, your designated broker. But I certainly wouldn't, you know, just trust anyone who's doing what they're doing. Right. So, any questions about that comment I just made? Or can we dive in?
I think I'm good.
Let's dive in. Okay, let's go to paragraph 9. And first page, which is titled Title Insurance Company. So on that blank where it says Title Insurance Company, you're going to write in who is going to provide the policy of title insurance for the buyer that the seller is going to pay for. Who's going to provide that? And so if you were to write in the name of the title insurance title insurance company who bought you the most meals or brought you the most chocolates, or who you know, gave you, okay, that would be a violation of the license law. So 18.8 RCW 18.85.235 is the RCW that prevents us from entering into any sort of a collusion with, really, or against a title company. And so so we want to, you know, stay out of that. And my suggestion for a title company would be to ask the listing agent, if it's not already in their remarks, and just ask the listing agent who they would prefer to use for title and escrow. Because by using the title company they like, they might have already run some preliminary title work. It might be easier for the title company and help alleviate expenses for our buyer if they're going to be paying any part of that. But generally, you're going to see that the seller pays for the for the title insurance for the buyer, and the only thing the buyer is going to do is for their lender, the buyer is going to purchase a separate policy of title insurance, right? And sometimes that's called sometimes that's called a mortgagee's policy, and or a lender's policy. Okay, so that's a separate issue from our contract. That's the one that the lender is just going to require the buyer to do. But in terms of this one right here, line 9, we want to be aware that that ties in also with paragraphs D and E on bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. So D and E are important to know that they tie in with 9, so that when you're going over the forms with your buyer, you can say, yeah, so on paragraph 9, title insurance company, you want to refer to D and E, pages 2 and 3, bottom of 2, top of 3, that address a couple of important issues. So the first one I want to address with you on this is paragraph D, that says condition of title. So the condition of the title it says in the first sentence here that unless otherwise specified in this agreement, title to the property shall be marketable at closing, period, right? So there's a lot of agents in our industry, longtime agents, who've been doing the same thing wrong for a whole lot of years, right? And I do that. We all do this. We hear one thing, we see one thing, it makes sense to us, we believe it, so we proceed under that belief, not knowing that underlying there's a whole bunch of other issues, right? And then as we age and go on in life and stuff like that, we start saying, oh, you know what? Could be that. And we discover something else. And so what is lying underneath that sentence are like 6 other sentences that basically say, yeah, that's true. The seller is going to provide marketable title at closing for you, buyer, but the following things are not going to be considered unmarketable. So you just got to take them. For example, this is what this says. If there are any reserved oil or mining rights, you just gotta live with someone else having the oil and mining rights to your property. Okay, maybe that's not a big deal for your buyer, but for some buyers it is. And I'm sure that if they don't ever see that until they get to the closing table and for the first time see the preliminary title report and see that there's reserved oil and mining rights by the B&O Railroad, they're probably not going to be very happy. And usually when they're not very happy, they look to blame you. So you want to make sure you're ready to go to that closing table with your buyer, and you want to make sure that you're protecting them by giving them an opportunity to see if there's any oil or mining rights without discovering it for the first time at the closing table. Devontae, if you're able to put on your video, I love it. If not, I guess there's a reason why you can't put on your video, and I understand. Oh, there you are. Okay. If there's distraction.
Sorry, right here.
Okay.
Sorry, my bad.
Sorry.
I'm at the KW office. Sorry, I'm late, but yeah.
Okay, glad you're here. Okay, so so that is your one of the 3 things that is found there in that paragraph 9 that are exceptions to that first sentence rule, that the seller is going to provide marketable title to the buyer, saying that if there's reserved oil and mining rights, that's not going to be considered unmarketable. Too bad, buyer. You're going to have to, maybe in another couple of years, you're going to have a mining company come digging up your backyard. So at least they have the rights to do that, and you, the owner of the property, are not going to be able to. Someone else owns your mineral rights below you. I think the buyer would want to know that, right? I was one of those weirdos, when I bought my first house, I was just a young guy, 20, 25 years old, and I remember standing out in my backyard and thinking, I own everything above me as far as eternity goes. I own everything, and I own everything below my property, right below my feet, all the way to the center of the earth. It's all mine. And I thought that was pretty cool to just think those thoughts and know that I owned all that. And then so different people are different. So some buyers are going to freak out when they find out that some of these things are not going to be there. And so the other two things, besides the reserve mineral rights, are if there's any easements that would affect their use of the property. So your buyer is going to be pretty freaked out if they're sitting out on their back patio in the summertime in their underwear, sipping coffee, and the neighbor comes walking across their backyard and say, "Hey, good to see you, neighbor. I'm using my easement to cross here to get to the mailbox. Hope you don't mind." I think they would be upset, right, to discover there is an easement there for the neighbor. So as it is in the contract, they're not protected from that. Your buyer is not protected from that. Nor are they protected from any deed restrictions that have been placed on the deed of that property. So sometimes restrictions are placed on deeds that could affect their use of the property. Maybe it's a deed restriction that says alcohol can never be served on these premises or consumed on these premises. If it was someone who enjoys a good Cabernet like I do, they're going to be upset to discover that, right? Mm-hmm. So these are things that oftentimes the buyer's not going to know about until they get to the closing table. And the only way you can protect your buyer from having those three things come up is to use the form 22T, which is the title contingency addendum. That's 22T as in title. And so that little form, short little form, just gives the buyer a 5-day period to exercise their due diligence in looking at the preliminary title report and seeing if any of those three things are there. Seems reasonable to me, but that's called the buyer's due diligence. And again, if the seller is trying to prevent the buyer from doing their due diligence, says,
sorry, just real quick, you said it gives the buyer the chance to do what?
Do their due diligence. Yeah, due diligence is something we were talking about at the beginning that we would, a seller would probably want to make sure the buyer does, because when a seller gives the buyer their due diligence periods to check things out, then they have a certain immunity. That seller has a certain immunity from getting sued later after closing by that buyer. And if they're denied that, then really that buyer has carte blanche to sue them after closing. And if they went to court, they'd say, "Yeah, Your Honor, the buyer would say, Your Honor, I was wanting to know about title. I was wanting to do that, but when I offered a 22T title contingency, so I could have that little couple of days, 5 days to check out these issues in title, I was denied the right to do that. So now I'm suing the seller who denied me the right to do that. See, now that seller's immunity is gone. And the court's likely to rule in favor of the buyer who's been damaged now because they didn't get a chance to check out that title to do their due diligence. So that same thing, Devontae could apply toward an inspection, a general home inspection, 10 days. So if the buyer comes in and voluntarily doesn't submit the 35, that submits a 35W waiver of the inspections, that's different, right? That's different. But if the remarks in the listing said your offer is going to be a whole lot more likely to get accepted if you use the form 35W, and then you use the 35W, okay, your buyer's still going to maybe be able to get in there and sue later after closing. So
Gotcha.
as a listing agent, you just don't want to encourage your seller to try to be doing away with the forms that give buyers and sellers kind of a even standing and things. Devontae?
Yep. No, heard. Makes sense. I'm just taking notes. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thought I heard you ask.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so then so that 22T, you're going to get, sometimes you're going to get resistance, and I hate to say it, but it's true, that the resistance you get will be coming from someone who's ignorant about the law, about due diligence, about how courts are ruling these days, someone who's completely ignorant about it, and they are basically steering a ship that's about to crash into the rocks. Sometimes I know that in order for our buyer to get that property that in their mind is their dream home, they just got to get it. They've already lost out on 3 other houses, They tell you, they instruct you and say, you know what, I just want you to get rid of that Form 22T. Or I want you to get rid of that Form 35 and replace it with 35W. Or I want you to do to strike. I want you to strike paragraph W. Well, as long as your client, to whom you owe the duty of loyalty, is asking you to do that, and as long as you've warned them and said, hey, you're getting rid of your due diligence period here, you sure you want to do that? And as long as they say, yeah, I want to do that, then you're okay to go ahead and do that. But that's a far cry from telling your buyer, hey, if you want to get a property in this market, you got to waive everything. So just waive that, waive this, and waive. I wake up at night with nightmares, honestly, about brokers in our offices doing that, and I hope that doesn't ever happen. I know it won't to any of you, but but sometimes I think agents get a little carried away thinking they're doing the right thing, and they're doing the wrong thing. So the other part of that paragraph D to be aware of is that at the end of the page 2, it says title shall be conveyed by a statutory warranty deed. Okay, so in pre-licensing classes, we all learned that a statutory warranty deed, also called a general warranty deed, has 5 basic covenants that the seller is making to the buyer in conveying the property to them. They're covenanting that there are no, that they are in fact the owner of the property, entitled to property. They're covenanting, number 1, they're covenanting that that they have the right to convey title to someone else. They're covenanting, it's a hard word to say, covenanting. They're covenanting that there are no encumbrances and liens against the property unless they have disclosed them in writing otherwise, which would be on a title report, right? So that's usually the disclosure. 4th, that there's nobody else who's going to be showing up at their door saying, hey, I own this property, or I have the water rights to this property, or I have the this to that property. They're covenanting that. And then 5th, they're saying that if anybody does show up and do that, that they'll defend that buyer in court. So those are the 5 covenants given by the seller to the buyer in a general warranty deed, which is what this is saying that's going to be delivered. Okay. So now we also have another kind of deed, which used to be called in the old days, like prior to 30 years ago, it used to be called a bargain and sale deed. And so, so sometimes that term is still used because it was, it was put into real estate law books. And so lawyers oftentimes just go back to their books and pull out the old books out of the shelf and use that term. But it's not really the term that's used today. The term that's used today is called a special warranty deed. So a special warranty deed is the same as a bargain and sale deed. It basically is still giving those same 5 covenants that I was talking about before in a general warranty deed, but with a special warranty deed, they are limited. They are limited to the time period in which that owner actually owned the property. So in other words, a seller who is a repo company, they've just repossessed property, they're a lender or whatever who's just repossessed a property. They just got title a week ago and now they're selling it. They will often use a special warranty deed because their lawyer advised them and said, don't be giving covenants for periods of time in which you have no idea what was happening to the property. Sometimes investment companies use these special warranty deeds. Sometimes relocation companies use them, but and they're not really something you should fear necessarily, but you should be aware of. And so you want to be able to explain this to your buyers, right? So you don't want your buyers freaking out, not knowing what it is. And so you want to be able to just explain that, you're going to get the same 5 covenants that are given in a general warranty deed with this special one, but they're only going to be for the time period in which that owner actually owned the property. And your title insurance policy is going to cover everything before that. So we just want to make sure we're not skimping anywhere on that title insurance. Just go with the normal policy that's in paragraph E that we're going to see in a minute, and your buyer should be fine. Any questions about that?
Kind of. Do you advise, like, if you're listing a house, do you advise your clients to use a special warranty deed?
If you're listing a house,
Yeah.
no. No, if they have a lawyer that advises them to do that, that's one thing, but you shouldn't ever encourage them. Because you see, by encouraging them to use a special warranty deed, what you would be doing is probably limiting the buyers who are going to come and buy the property.
Yeah. Okay.
There might be some who are nervous about that. If you have a lawyer who tells them, don't buy that property, they're not going to give you a general warranty deed,
Right.
or people who don't understand what it is. So
That makes sense.
So I would. Okay, paragraph E on the next page, which is page 3, the very top is for title insurance. And it says that the seller authorizes buyer's lender or closing agent, which is another name for escrow, by the way, at seller's expense to apply for the then current ALTA form of homeowner's policy of title insurance. Okay. So that is the most commonly utilized policy of title insurance issue today. But it is not the standard policy of title insurance. Okay, it's above the standard. The standard is a term that was used for 100 years. Standard policy of title insurance. And it was kind of done away with back in 1980 because through competition of the title companies, they started giving more and more coverage that went above the standard. So if you fall for that term standard, which is super deceiving, so don't fall for it, you would be giving your buyer a lesser policy. So where we most typically find that is on Form 22D, the optional clauses addendum. Paragraph 2 says that there's two choices, two boxes on that form on paragraph 2 to check, which you should not check either of those two boxes. The first one says that the seller is going to issue the standard homeowner's policy. And there's a temptation for agents who haven't been to classes like this to want to check that box because they think it's going to give their buyer the normal policy. No, that's not normal. Standard is not normal. Standard is a 30-year-old outdated policy. 40 almost now, 40 almost outdated policy that is going to give your buyer less title coverage than they would otherwise get in this paragraph E. So you want them to just get what's in paragraph E, means leave paragraph 2 alone on that Form 22D, the optional clauses. I'll be hitting that next week again, but I touch on it 3 times just to make sure nobody's checking that box, you know. So think that one through a little bit. Okay, and then guess those are your highlights. So
Just to clarify, you don't want to check either boxes. You don't want to check the extended coverage as well.
correct, because that extended box, the second one in paragraph 2 of 22D, is for a super expensive policy where they do surveys and all kinds of stuff, which really, if you ask the title examiner at the title company if they would use that if they're buying, they would say, yeah, absolutely not, it'd be worthless.
Okay.
Never do it. Maybe on certain specialty properties it would help, but the problem is that in that paragraph 2, it says that the buyer's going to pay for it themselves.
Okay.
When it's probably not needed 95+% of the time. And so if you don't check it, what the buyer can do is after we're signed off with the seller, they can go ahead and talk to the title examiner at the title company and say, hey, would you recommend that I go ahead and pay for an extended policy beyond what I'm getting? And the seller doesn't care if the buyer wants to throw their money away.
Right.
But at least the buyer can check that out before contractually obligating themselves to get it.
John, the only time I've ever been told that maybe do the extended is if there's owner financing involved. Otherwise, just the normal one. I don't know what you think about that, but that's the only time I've ever been thought that would be a benefit.
Yeah, I still wouldn't check it.
Okay.
I would just encourage the seller to go down to the title company and talk to the title examiner. Well, I don't know. We used to go down to the title company. Are we still allowed to go down to the title company
Hope so.
with COVID rules and things? I don't know. I think you can if you're wearing your mask and all that stuff. I don't know. We're right. I've heard that we're only one of 10 states now who still have restrictions
I thought it was 5 states.
Was it down to 5?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I would just encourage them to do that in any situation, and not check it and obligate them to pay for it before at least getting a chance to talk to the title examiner, right?
Got it.
Okay, and then so that's item 9 on your first page of the Form 21. It's kind of a big deal, isn't it? And so those things I went over are things that a lot of people don't understand or pay attention to, and just by having paid attention to me today and maybe looking into it and reading over it a little later, so you really understand this, you can explain it to your clients. Where I think there's a whole lot of the realtor population that doesn't know those things that we just went over. Number 10 is for the closing agent. And so oftentimes the title insurance company and the closing agent, which is escrow, are in the same building, right? With the same mother name, like a Chicago or First American or a Fidelity or whatever. So, but there are actually 2 licenses in that building, licensed to that building. One is for title insurance, and the other license is professional licenses for escrow services. And it's just such a convenience, right, to have them in the same building and be able to just do everything right there. And that's what I would recommend doing. You can have them be separate, but by doing so, it's going to cost your buyer a couple $100 more than normal. That's just what they do. And so I think whenever you can, you should probably try to use the same title and escrow company. And then you put in there the closing agent's going to be, and you put the company's name on that line. An individual LPO's name is not necessary to put in there. LPO stands for Limited Practice Officer. That's not the escrow agent. Escrow agent is the company. Like Chicago or Fidelity or First American or whatever.
So you don't typically put any individual name on the individual part of that line,
You can, you can. It's fine.
but there's no point to.
Not really, unless the listing agent has a closer that they know they can count on, who's going to do it quickly and do a good job.
Got it.
I would trust the listing agent's judgment in that.
Okay.
And if that's the case, maybe write them in there, but that's just an optional thing. Main thing is get the company's name in there. Number 11 is for the closing date. So two finesse items. We have the closing date and we have the possession date. And so you got to be really careful about both of these. So that first one that says closing date, you want to be aware that the Northwest real estate experts, lawyers, are all unanimous, are saying, do not ever write in or sooner. Do not ever write in on or before, and then put a date, because that basically makes the contract an unenforceable contract. Be like saying, the buyer agrees to pay $745,000 or less for this property. Okay, I don't think that's a very secure agreement, right? It's like, what? So you want to make sure you put in a date definite, and then if the buyer and seller want to close sooner, they can certainly close sooner, but they just have to mutually agree on it. And then we just have to use an addendum that says the closing date shall be moved up to, and put in the date to when it's going to be closed. I don't know how long it takes, seconds. to get that, sent off, authenticized to your buyer, seller, or whatever, and get those done and get them to escrow. So I think you can get that done pretty quick. So, and I asked a lawyer, in fact, I asked our legal hotline lawyer, what if the escrow company is the one who's telling the agent, saying, hey, I need you to write in or sooner, so we can close it sooner if we're able to. And her answer was, tell that escrow agent that they're engaged in the unauthorized practice of law and they're susceptible to a $10,000 fine right now. And to stick there and keep their nose out of our client's business. That's what she said, very firmly. Oh, okay. So I'll let John do that. He can talk. He can be the trash talker, right? He can be the trash talker. I have a hard time doing that, but I guess it's got to be conveyed in some way to those escrow people who are sticking their nose where it shouldn't be. We can get that document to them like that, really quick before they close, but because they have to be on or before or sooner doesn't mean the parties have to close sooner if everything's ready to go. Either one of the parties could say, no, I want to go with the original date. And then the other party would have to say, okay, well, great. Well, we have an unenforceable contract then because we had the wording in there on or before or sooner. So my recommendation, of course, is that you would just put in a date definite and not put in any wording before it or after it. And then if the buyer and seller mutually agree to a different date, they can always write that an addendum. Okay. So as far as that date, how do we determine that date? Each transaction will be a little different. It depends on what feasibilities might be involved, depends on what financing is going to be involved. So you just want to be in contact with the other parties in the transaction to get a good idea of when this would likely close. And it's going to be some guesswork there, isn't it? Because we can't be precise, but we can try to be as close as we can. If we short it too much and it's not ready to close, does the seller have to automatically extend for 3 days or 2 days? No. Seller can say, I'm not extending. I got a new buyer that's going to bring me $10,000 more. I'll go with them. So we want to make sure there's enough time for it to close, but not so much time that it freaks the seller out. And it makes them wonder suspiciously why we're needing to have 60 days to close.
In that case, the buyer would get the earnest money back, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because by the operation of time, the contract can expire, right? Once it's expired, neither party performed, the buyer didn't perform because they didn't have their contingencies met. So they should get their earnest money back.
Okay.
So the second one of those finesse items on that line 11 is for possession date. And so for the possession date, you're going to need to have some communication with the listing agent to find out, what the seller's plans are, and that kind of thing. And as a listing agent, you want to be a little bit careful about that. Because what if you're the listing agent, you said to the buyer's agent, oh, seller's already out. Yep. They've already cleaned out the house. They're gone. They've taken everything and they're moved all the way across the US to this other state. Okay, sometimes buyers with that knowledge use that as leverage to try to get things done at the last minute, like a reduction in purchase price, reduction in other costs and stuff. And so, so we want to not reveal these types of confidential things in transactions, but if the other side wants to reveal that to us, so be it. But we don't want to give that away. We want to keep our sellers' information confidential. So this possession date, I like on closing. Seems really nice, right? Just have it be on closing. But if it is to be other, then it's going to be after closing for possession. That means the seller is going to stay in possession beyond closing for a certain number of days. And my recommendation is that you would, no, my recommendation, no, the legal requirement would be to use Form 65B. 65B is the addendum that is for the seller maintaining possession beyond closing, occupancy beyond closing. So that seller, let's say, wants to stay for 3 days. So the temptation on that Form 65B is to write in that the rent amount is going to be 0. And the problem lawyers are bringing forth to us is that by putting in a 0 there, we're setting our buyers up to lose, because that means that's the amount you can sue for if the seller stays in longer. So they're saying that the way you should fill that out is you should put in that Form 65B, you should put in an exorbitant daily amount of rent, like $500 a day, I'll just say as an example. And then you put in the other, right below that, there's a space that says other, and you put in rent shall be waived for the first 3 days. That way, all parties know it's going to be free for 3 days, but after 3 days, it's going to be $500 a day. Now, if the buyer has to sue the seller for even more time, the seller that you got $500 a day to sue them for. I think lawyers are going to love you, you know, if you set up the client that way, set up the buyer to make sure the buyer has something to sue the seller for.
That is interesting because I had to do that on my first purchase, but the way I wrote it was 0 for rent, but then in the other, my client wanted to have $500 every day they didn't move out. So that's how I wrote it, but that was probably the wrong way to write it, huh?
According to the lawyers, yeah, it would be the wrong way. Personally, I feel like you would still have some merit to that, you know,
Right.
to do something with, but the lawyers would probably say, no, what you write in there is the only thing you can prove damages for.
Huh, good to know.
So yeah, so anyway, so that's been going on for a couple of years now, that we've been getting a lot of zeros written in there, and I just don't want any of you guys doing that. You know, that's a dangerous thing for your buyer's protection. Okay, so possession and occupancy are 2 different words that have different meanings. So a buyer gets possession really easily. When the deal closes, yeah, you got possession. Here's the key or keys. Here's a garage door opener. Here's the lease I have with the renter who's still in there, probably not going to be out for at least a week or 2. And the buyer says, "Well, no, I want to move into that." Well, no, you're not, because there's a tenant there. Well, you agreed to possession. Yeah, you got possession. Here's the key. here's this, here's you have a legal right to collect the rents, but you're not going to get occupancy until you get the renter out of there. Right? So occupancy is something you can't contractually obligate, which is why it's nowhere in our forms, because we know landlord-tenant laws don't allow for forcing someone out of the house. So if there is someone occupying the house, we want to make sure that that is addressed as occupancy. And dealing with the occupancy is going to be different than the possession. So if you get into a situation like that, that's one where you might want to get a hold of me and let me help you through that a little bit. So, so keep me apprised if something comes up like that. Number 12 is for services of the closing agent for payment of utilities. So you're going to mark either requested or waived. Now the escrows are not currently charging anymore for prorating the utilities. So tell me why we would want to waive having escrow do that. I have a hard time thinking of a good reason. The only thing I can think of is that the other side, either the agent or the seller, thinks that somehow that means they're going to get away without having to pay some utilities. And that's just, they just don't understand what it's saying. It's saying, is escrow going to do that proration of it or not? And I think it's always a good idea to have escrow do it. So I would suggest that you always check the box requested. If I had a listing agent who insisted that it be waived because their seller somehow thinks it should be waived and blah, blah, blah. But my buyer wants to play it, I would probably go ahead and go with the waived, explaining it to the buyer, and just make sure that the buyer, prior to signing at closing, verifies that the sellers paid their utility bill. Because all we're waiving is the escrow doing it. Nothing that says we can't do it for ourselves, right? But it just gives us an extra burden to make sure we've checked on those utility bills prior to closing. It's kind of easier to have escrow do that. Number 13 is for charges or assessments that are levied before but due after closing. They're either going to be assumed by the buyer or prepaid in full by the seller at closing. So let me also reiterate here that if the seller was given notice of a special assessment against their house for a sewer extension and told that it was due by June of 2020, and they just didn't ever pay it. And now we're trying to close now. Okay, this doesn't apply. Because this says if it's been assessed before closing but not due till after closing, that's not the case. It was assessed before closing, but was due also before closing, and the seller just didn't pay it. So that's the seller's obligation to pay that. And this paragraph wouldn't even apply. Number 13 wouldn't even apply. But if the special assessment that I just said in my example was a sewer extension And they said, yes, here in 2020, you've been assessed this, and we're gonna let you pay it off to us in monthly increments starting next month, and you'll be paying for the next 7 years. Every month, okay? So now it's been assessed before closing, but many of the payments for it are gonna be due after closing. So now we're talking about the ones after closing. All the monthly ones that were due before closing, the seller has the obligation to pay those. But from closing on, we're trying to identify who's going to pay for those new, those assessments due now. Is it going to be the seller or the buyer? And this becomes, you know, kind of a big deal because sometimes, like one time a couple of years ago, I had a FSBO seller. And we represented the buyer. The FSBO seller was at the closing and said, hey, I got roped into this deal here where you've got, I'm supposed to pay $8,000 here on my closing statement, $8,000 for a sewer capacity charge. And I'm not paying that. I said, I guess you're not selling your property then. Okay, well, then I'm not selling my property. That's just the way it's going to be. And I said, okay, well, you know, I'll let the buyer know, and the buyer will probably contact their lawyer and start the suit for specific performance against you. And per paragraph P of our contract, you're going to have to pay their lawyer fees for them when you lose, because you will lose that lawsuit. She said, what are you talking about? I wouldn't lose because this isn't fair. And I said, well, of course it's fair. It's right there in paragraph 13. And the box is checked that says the seller is to pay it at closing. And the escrow papers were prepared accordingly. And now that's showing up on your statement and you're upset. I don't know why. Had you had an agent who was familiar with the forms, they could have told you this is something you're paying, but you wanted to save a commission. You didn't want to pay those darn $6,000. Now it's going to cost you $8,000. Because you didn't have an agent, right? And we went for, I'm not exaggerating, we went the entire day on the phone before she finally backed away and said, okay, I'll go ahead and sign, and did. But see, when we talk about the value of our knowledge and service that we can give, it's important to understand things like that. Had she hired, if I was an agent, had she hired me as her agent, would I have told her about the sewer capacity charge? Yes. And it would have saved her $8,000. So we do, you know, directly save our clients money all the time. And the agent we had that represented the buyer saved our buyer $8,000, right? Check the box where the seller had to pay it. So when we talk about our value as real estate agents, I don't look at things like, you know, well, I'm going to come and load the moving truck for you. No, I look at things like in the contracts that we know the contract enough that we're going to save them money, where they might get charged otherwise in incidents like this. So the sewer capacity charges happen a lot. And so that's one of them to think about on this. And the other one that happens a lot is with condominiums. With condominiums, sometimes special assessments are charged for re-roofing the building, and sometimes they're charged for resurfacing the parking lot and things like that. And so when those come, you know, when I owned my condo, I was not uncommon to get a $10,000 special assessment slapped against my unit.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was a shocker to me, but it's just the way it was. That was for repaving of the parking lot and for repainting the building. So we want to be aware of that and be thinking about that. You know, that's also that paragraph is directly tied in with paragraph H. There's two paragraphs, and it's the smaller one. It's the second one that addresses that issue. It's on the very top of page 4 and addresses that issue of the special assessments. So I'm not talking about homeowner dues. Those are separate. So in my condo that I had, I still had to pay my $500 a month for my monthly dues. Plus I got to pay a $10,000 special assessment.
Yeah.
Isn't that lovely? Number 14 is for Ferpta, which is the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. And so there's special law that's passed to give the IRS rights to put liens against property for unpaid taxes by foreigners. By foreigner, I mean someone who is not paying taxes on a regular basis here in the United States. Because if they're living here in the United States without citizenship, but are paying taxes, okay, they don't have to identify as a foreign entity. They are considered a US citizen for purposes of taxation as long as they're paying taxes. So this paragraph is not a contractual paragraph. This is the only thing in our whole deal that's not really contractual. Doesn't matter how you check it. It's a law. And this is a preliminary step to identify whether that seller is a US citizen for tax purposes or not. So the seller has to make a declaration of citizenship or non-citizenship. And they use a double negative on it, right? So it says the seller is or is not a foreign person. Well, in most cases, they're going to check is not, because they are the US citizen, right? Or they are paying taxes. So so the Ferpta paragraph on the back here is in number J, or letter J on page 4, toward the top of page 4, that says seller citizenship and Ferpta, and that explains a little bit more about what that is, summarizing there. But as I said, this is not contractual, so it doesn't really matter what's checked or not checked. But the law requires that when this closes, the seller makes their declaration. And if the seller doesn't make a declaration of citizenship, the deal closes. And it turns out the seller was a foreign entity that owed minimally 10% of the purchase price, not of the proceeds, of the purchase price. So let's say it was $1 million home, which anymore isn't. We used to think that was a really grandiose home, not anymore. That's just a little bit above the median price, right? So $1 million home, there's a large amount of tax that's due. 10% of that's due, you know. And as far as I can calculate it, that's $100,000. That's going to go as a lien against this buyer's new home. That's what the IRS has the right to do. So to protect our buyer, we want to make sure that before a buyer goes in and closes, we have received evidence that the seller has submitted their declaration of citizenship to escrow. Because if they haven't, we have a Form 90 FSBO. No, not FSBO, what am I saying? Form 90 Ferpta, sorry, I got my acronyms mixed up there. So Form 90 Ferpta that you would send to the other agent to say, hey, here's a notification for you. You've got X number of days to provide the Ferpta, or we have the right to get out. 3 days, I think it's 3 days, or we have the right to leave the transaction, not close. So there's a way to protect your buyer there, and that's the Form 90 Ferpta. Number 15 is for agency disclosure. So you've got 2 lines there. The top line is buyer representation, and the second line underneath that is for the seller representation. So the buyer represented, the buyer's represented by the buyer's broker most of the time, right? And the seller is represented by the listing broker most of the time. That's how those are going to be checked. But sometimes that's not the case, especially with off-market transactions. It's really common in an off-market transaction to have the buyer represent the buyer only. So they would check the buyer broker, and then where it says seller represented by, they're a FSBO, for sale by owner. So you would check the box that says unrepresented. Or it could be a situation where you had a buyer looking in a neighborhood, and you knocked on doors in the neighborhood, found a seller, and you got along great with the seller, and you went ahead and put together this off-market deal where you're going to represent both sides as a dual agent. So in that case, you would mark that the buyer is represented by buyer broker. No, you wouldn't. I'm sorry. You check the second box that says buyer / listing broker dual agent. You would check that in both of those lines if you're going to be a dual agent representing both the buyer and the seller. Sometimes, like let's say that you get a listing of your own, you're excited, so you immediately schedule an open house and you can't wait to hold that house open. So you go running over there on Sunday and you hold that house open, and a buyer comes through and says, wow, I love this house. This is exactly what I was looking for. It's just like the house I used to own in Boston. And now here I am across the other side of the country and I get that same house. I love that house, so I want you to write an offer for me. Okay. For you to be a dual agent would not be allowed. First of all, common sense would say, hey, you know the seller, you know all about their goals and aspirations for getting the proceeds they want to get and all this kind of stuff, you know, so your loyalty needs to go to that seller. The buyer you just met a half hour ago for the first time. So really it would be disingenuous to say I'm going to be a dual agent represent both the same. No, you can't do that. And you can't do it under a fairly recent 2014 change in license law that basically says that you can only be a dual agent if you have a listing agreement signed with the seller and a buyer agency agreement signed with the buyer prior to the buyer ever seeing that property. Prior to. So what you would do in that situation is you would represent the seller only. So you would check the box, the second line of it, and you would check the seller is represented by listing broker, and in the first line you would put unrepresented. Should that cause a panic to that buyer? Not if you explain it right. So you have license law requirement duty to give that buyer the agency law pamphlet, right? So you would go to the third paragraph, which is representation duties that are owed to all parties. And you would point that out to them, that even though you don't represent them, you represent a seller, you still owe them the duties, and you start reading them off of that thing of honesty and good faith and all the different things, you know, that are on there that really a buyer shouldn't have great concern about. The duties that you would owe your seller and not the buyer that would probably should concern them, but they don't really know, are the duty of loyalty you owe toward your seller, and the duty of confidentiality. But as long as you tell that buyer, just don't tell me your secrets, because if you do, I have to tell the seller because of my duty of loyalty. And I don't owe you the duty of confidentiality. So think of me as your mother-in-law, no, or father-in-law, you know. You tell me it's, my mom used to tell me that don't ever tell dad a secret, because if you tell him, everybody in town is going to know it in about 2 days. And I think she was right. My dad used to like to talk. So confidentiality, loyalty are the duties, the main duties that are different between your representation of the client and then not having those representation duties. So you represent the seller, buyer's unrepresented, but you still own the duties of honesty and good faith and all those kinds of things, right? So they'll be treated right and we'll get the deal closed. They'll write the deal. You just won't owe them the confidentiality and the loyalty. Okay, so I see either some confused looks or some disinterested looks. Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Yeah, well, just because I'm curious, what would happen to the buyer's commission if they're unrepresented?
Good question. Only those of us who don't know the license law for real estate have that confusion. So oftentimes the consumers have that confusion. But we shouldn't as agents, because the license law specifically says that compensation and representation are totally separate things. You can represent one party and not get paid by them, and have the party that you don't represent pay you.
Huh.
That's perfectly okay. In fact, that's how most of our sales are done when we represent the buyer.
Right.
So it doesn't matter who pays the compensation, as long as it's in writing and the parties know who's paying the compensation. And so parties, as I said, parties who are not in our industry, though, you know, think this is a way they can get that commission. I can steal this food right out of their table. I will have them not represent me and write the deal, and I'll get that commission. No, has nothing to do with it. Has nothing to do with it. And in fact, that buyer doesn't pay the commission anyway. So why would that buyer think they're going to get the commission? They're not doing anything. And just because you're not representing them directly, you're still going to be doing a lot of the activities that are going to make this thing close.
Oh, got it.
If not most of them, right?
Right. So you're not a dual agent, but you're gonna get paid both ends essentially?
Right, that's correct. Because your contract with the seller says 6% as an example, right?
Yep.
And
Got
you're going to offer half of that maybe to the buyer's agent, but in this case, there's no buyer's agent. So that means you get it all.
Got it.
I'm glad you do, because I think most agents don't grasp that, you know, and I think it's important to understand, because that makes us, when we don't grasp that, it makes us susceptible to the manipulative buyer who thinks they're going to be able to somehow get, you know, squirrel away some of that commission for themselves. Well, no, they don't pay it, so they're not going to is not going to matter to them.
Right.
So is there time for me to give you this? Yes, there's time for me to give you this. So let me tell you a quick little story that I think will help with this whole thing. I'm hoping. So one time I was, years ago, I was in Cancun, Mexico, and spent 2 weeks there. And to be honest, after the first week, I was bored to death. So I just spent a whole bunch of time down at the local typical market where they sell all kinds of little stuff, little things they had in this big area covered for the rain. They had probably 100 shops, different shops there. And one of the first things I noticed were these onyx, which is a stone, fruits. And so these out of onyx stone, these different fruits, and I thought that was really cool. And it seemed like every shop had a different fruit. And so I thought, oh, fun thing to do. My last week here will be to collect the fruits. And so I was, and I found a fruit bowl, an onyx fruit bowl. And so I bought this onyx fruit bowl, and I had it in my condo where I was staying there, and I was just, collecting these fruits and stuff and having fun with that. And then I got down to where I had to leave, and I was looking at my fruit bowl, and I was thinking, you know what, color-wise, something's missing here. And I was trying to think of what it was, and all of a sudden it hit me, oh, a yellow banana. There's no yellow banana in there. I got every other fruit, and I got no yellow banana. I can't have a fruit bowl without a yellow banana. So I ran back to this place, and I looked through the shops, and I thought for sure I'd seen one, but I couldn't find one. And so I seemed to exhaust the whole market. And I was standing at the edge of the market, scratching my head, thinking, where did I see that thing? Or did I? And this guy comes up to me, a local guy, and he says, can I help you? And I said, how could you help me? And he goes, well, you look like you're trying to find something. And I said, well, I am. And he said, well, what is it? I can find it for you, and you don't have to pay me anything. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, because the owners of all these shops have made a pre-agreement that upon directing you to their shop, they will pay me some money. And he says, oh, so I do have to pay you. And he goes, no, you don't pay me, you pay the shop owner. The shop owner can do whatever they want with their money. And they happen to have pre-chosen to give me some money. Because I bring you over there. I thought, well, he's just like us. Right? He's just like us in the brokerage industry. And so I thought, yeah, I want to see where this leads. So yeah, okay. I want, and I told him a yellow onyx banana fruit thing. And he says, huh. And he smiled. I remember his smile. And he says, well, there's only one shop in this entire place that has them, has two of them. And that shop faces out toward that road, that side road on the outside. And so you probably wouldn't have even noticed it. But let me take you over there right now. And on the way over there, he was giving me tips on negotiating for stuff. And yet who's going to pay him the money? The seller. So he was representing me, but he was getting paid by the owner. And I went over there and I bought my onyx banana and I had my collection. And as I was walking away, I turned and looked and I saw him with his hand out and having some coins dropped in his hand. Pesos, they call them in Mexico. And so he got his pesos for bringing me over there, but that wasn't money that I paid him. I paid the owner. The owner could have done whatever they want. They could have bought a margarita with that money, but they chose to give it to that guy as a pre-agreement, right?
Right.
And so I always think about that when I think of separating out, compensation from representation and how our industry really works. You're welcome for that wonderful story.
Yeah, thank you.
So that number 15, paragraph 15 is tied in to paragraph T of page 5, paragraph T of page 5, just explains agency representation, what that means, which you can read through on your own. The last sentence is one that says that all parties acknowledge receipt of the pamphlet entitled The Law of Real Estate Agency. And we always want to make sure we have proof that we gave them that pamphlet. So this is a good place to have them put their initials, right? Maybe even write the word received next to where they initial or something, but just to have them initial that, at least show some evidence that you gave them that pamphlet. You want to make sure you always have some sort of a way of doing that. Now, we also have that up on our up on our Keller Williams documents site, where you can pull that up and utilize that. And if you have trouble finding that, ask Gwen or Eva where you can find that. And I'd just have some of those printed out, if they're just one page, and it's just this simple statement saying this buyer, put their name in there, acknowledges receipt of the pamphlet entitled The Law of Real Estate Agency, and then have them sign it. Done. Okay, because we have to give that pamphlet to everyone with whom we engage in real estate conversations or activities, right? Whether we represent them or not. So number 16 says addenda, which is the plural of addendum. So something that is attached to this 6-page document, like a financing addendum, 22A, is called an addendum. At the time of mutual agreement, time of contract formation, it's included. Anything that comes after we already have mutuality is not called an addendum. It's called an amendment. And legally, there's a reason, that it's important to know that there's a difference. And so right now we're dealing with addenda, plural, and we would likely put in there 22A, financing, 22D, optional clauses, 22T, title contingency, 35, inspections, right? Okay, so in most every transaction, we're going to have those addenda.
Excuse me, do you just write in there the form number, or do you have to?
Well, there's a drop. When you do it online, there's a drop down, and so it's good. So as you click, and it'll give you boxes to click, and as you click the addendum that you want to put in there, it'll automatically add it.
Oh, awesome.
But if you're writing it by hand, you would have to write those in 22A, 22D, 22T, 35, whatever the.
Okay, so just the
drop
number,
down
not the actual description.
Yeah, and if you haven't done a transaction before all the way through, I would recommend doing lots of practice runs. Where you just make up a buyer, what they're looking for, and then find a listing, and then practice writing that transaction. And what likely addenda you would use for that.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
I learned the hard way that it only goes down to a certain number. So when I had to do that 65 for the rent back, I didn't know what to do, but I learned that the hard way, you have to type it in through like the like manually type it in.
Okay, you kind
Yeah.
of cut out a little bit there, Lucas, but I think what you're saying is that it just, there's only a certain number it allows, and after that, you gotta write it in and pen after you print it out.
Well, I was doing DocuSign, so I didn't have, I had to like go through DocuSign to do it.
Oh. Huh. Huh. Okay, I don't know. I
Yeah,
guess I guess that's why these practice runs, I think, are so important to
for
get
sure.
used to doing them. Okay, so cool. So then on the bottom left, you have a line for 2 lines for the buyer's signatures and the date of those signatures. Make sure they're dated. Make sure they sign, and then there's dates there. And then you would put in the rest of the buyer's information there. Really critical is that you would put in your own name, company, phone number, and firm's document email address using Authentisign or autofill, I guess, say using autofill, it should automatically fill that in. And if not, talk to the MCA, whether it be Gwen or not Gwen, Emily, and they will give you our documents email address. We've got thousands and thousands of them in their storage in there, you know, but I've never ever opened it. I've never even seen it. And then the other, and then your own email address has to go there. So anytime, so you have the listing brokers also there and their firms in there also. So anytime you give a notification or anything else in the transaction, you always have to send it to both places for it to be valid. If you only send it to one of those, they could come back and make a case for not having had mutuality. So always make sure you're sending them to both those places. And there's another, I think it's paragraph M that explains that. Yeah, because also it says you can only use electronic signatures if you have all 4 of those email addresses, the 2 brokers and the 2 firms. And otherwise you can't use electronic signatures for mutuality. So you want to make sure.
We're going to the gym after I'm off.
Well, enjoy. I think my girlfriend would love it if I ever made it to the gym. So I don't know where that came from.
Sorry, I didn't know I was unmuted.
Oh, I don't even see where you are.
Question. So in regards to the 4 emails,
Oh, okay. Did I hear a question?
in regards to the 4 emails, is that the emails of the seller, of the seller's form? Which are the 4 emails
Those 4
that are?
emails are your email, the other broker in the transaction email, and then your firm's email address, and then the other firm's email address. Those 4.
Okay.
So we got a little bit to go here, and I'm not going to make it through if I have to go to the bathroom so bad. So because it makes me feel all anxious and I can't think. So I want to run to the restroom really quickly. I'm going to leave everything on and stuff, and I'll be 3 minutes. I'll run to the bathroom and be right back, and we'll continue on. So if you need to go yourself, now's a good time to go. Otherwise, I'll see you in 3 minutes. Yes, I'm still masking up whenever I go around the office.
Sometimes I go back to some of it. You know, nostalgia, good for you. Okay. No, I goes by how many days are in the month. See, that was pretty anywhere. Now next month will be lower. because of the- I should only have one in there. Like, days. August 27, 68. April.
If you're trying to talk, John, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Okay, so Isabel, you can hear me
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
now?
Yes, sir.
John?
I couldn't before.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, I was muted. I don't know how that happened. Huh. Yeah, so my screen was shrunk, so someone came in my office and clicked stuff. Huh. I'll have to
I think-
investigate this later.
Well, I did notice it said you left and joined again while you were gone. It said KW training host is
Hey,
now.
Lucas, you're cutting out really bad.
Oh no, that's not good.
No, I just heard that. It's great. So
Of
whatever you're doing, there,
course.
do that.
It's not cutting out on my side.
It's not? Oh,
No.
No.
Oh,
just my stuff, yeah. Okay, so somehow it's just my equipment here. Okay, so now let's look at, so the seller signs and dates on the bottom right side of the first page, right? And if they sign and date without changes, have mutuality, right?
Mhm.
We have a mutual agreement. No longer is this an offer, it's now a contract. Right? Starts out as an offer. And once all parties have signed, that's a contract. And when is the contract date? It's not that. It's the date was written out. This
oh,
date, the contract mutuality, this is when we start counting for computation of time. And it's always the next day following that date is day one. Right? So if we were doing a 10-day inspection, then that 10-day inspection is going to be, day one is going to be Thursday. Day two is Friday. Day three is Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So we count all days for any computation of more than 5 days. If it's a computation of 5 days or less, we don't count weekends and holidays. So if I was counting a 5-day computation of time and we were signed off mutual today, day one is going to be tomorrow, Thursday. Day two is going to be Friday. Day three is going to be
Monday.
Monday. Day four is Tuesday. Day five is Wednesday. So that 5 days turned into 7, huh? Because of the weekend. And if there was a holiday, it would turn into 8. So, so it's really important to pay attention to the computation of time, which is paragraph L on your page 4. Computation of time explain 5 days, 5 days or less is not going to count weekends and holidays. But if it's over 5 days, you're going to count weekends and holidays as part of the computation of time. So there are times, you know, like around the holidays was a good example where we had a ton of holidays going on, you know, the considered holidays for computation of time. So we had Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Saturday, Sunday, that were not to be counted if it was 5 days or less. But if it was 10 days, we would count right over those and include those, but they're not weren't working days really for a lot of people. So we just, when we're representing our client, we always want to be aware of those. Okay. So that's paragraph L. So I wanted to then go ahead and skip now because we've covered this stuff over to page 3 and just let you know that on item G for like kind exchanges, these are the 1031s, you know, the starker exchanges as they're sometimes called. It's where there's an investment property that is going to be have tax deferred. Taxation is going to be deferred for by just switching over that tax liability to a different property. And they have to follow the rules to do that. So this would be a really good class for you to take from a title company that pay attention to those offerings as they come up, because they're oftentimes free or at least really inexpensive, and go and get a basic understanding of these 1031 exchanges, these like kind exchanges. And this is saying that all parties are agreeing to participate in anyone's like kind exchange, as long as it doesn't cost them any more money, which it won't. So nothing separate needs to be signed for a 1031 exchange. Then on page, I didn't mention before, and I apologize for that. When I was talking about closing in possession, that paragraph addresses some issues with closing in possession back on page 3. But I wanted to bring to your attention here in this class, starting with line number 74. I'm sorry. Oh, here it is. So it starts with line 78, line 78, lines run down the right side. And it says seller shall either repair or replace any system or appliance, including but not limited to plumbing, heat, electrical, and or including items that become inoperative or malfunctions system or appliance of at least equal value. Equal quality. Buyer reserves the right to walk through the property within 5 days of closing. Every one of us should be insisting to our buyers that we do a walkthrough 5 days before close, at least 5 days before closing, right? So we can look and make sure that everything's working like it was working when we first saw the property. This isn't a wish list or a punch list or any of that kind of business. This is an opportunity to walk back through and make sure that the things that we saw working are still working. Within 5 days of closing to verify that seller has maintained the property and systems and appliances as required by this paragraph. Okay, so make sure you're taking advantage of that and know where that is. You saw how long it took me to get there, and I've done this a gazillion times. So anyway, starting at about that line 78 there, we are going to be given those 5 days to walk through, and we need to insist on that. Okay, so okay, page 4, we've already gone through each of those, including paragraph L, which is for computation of time. Page 5, the assignment paragraph at the top, which is N, says that the buyer may not assign this agreement or buyer's rights here under without seller's prior written consent. This is big, unless the parties indicate, this is going to be on the name line on page 1, the buyer's name line, unless the parties indicate that assignment is permitted by the addition of, quote, and / or assigns, unquote. So you write in exactly those words after the buyer's name. And if the seller signs it, that means the buyer has the right to assign their interest in the purchase to anybody else. Typically, you would see that with investors.
Wholesalers.
And wholesalers. But if it's going to be a loan and buyer, the seller's going to get cashed out anyway, they might be concerned with qualifications and stuff for financing and things. But also the issue there is that if that person who it's been assigned to doesn't follow through and close, the liability falls on a signer who assigned it away to this other person. So as a seller, you still can go after the buyer if the person they assigned it to doesn't come through.
Quick question, if you know, are real estate agents, if you have your license, are you, and if you're buying a house, are you allowed to put and or signs after
Yeah.
your name?
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, P, I want you to always know this, that P, paragraph P is the attorney's fees clause. So if one party has to sue the other, the prevailing party, the winning party, gets to have their lawyer fees paid for them by the loser in the suit. So, so be aware of that, because it's not uncommon for threats. You know, that's the grown-up's way of saying I'm telling mom, is to sue, right? I'm going to sue. And really, those threats are empty unless it's followed through with. And if it's followed through with, the parties have to know that whoever wins the lawsuit is going to probably also be winning the right to have their attorney fees paid for them by the loser. Then we've gone over that, and then paragraph U is for the commission that's going to be paid according to how it's published in the MLS, right? Okay, so if it's not an MLS listing, there's no indication of where the commission is going to come from unless you include Form 41C. Form 41C is the agreement that the seller is going to pay the buyer agent's commission. V is for cancellation rights under lead-based paint. So lead-based paint law, which is federal, requires that what we call Form 22J, which is a lead-based paint disclosure. If it's built before 1978, the house was built before 1978, then the seller has to give, the owner has to give disclosures about their knowledge of lead paint. And under that form. And so like the property disclosure law, state property disclosure law, Form 17, we call it, there's 3 days that buyer has to cancel the deal. Paragraph W is that paragraph I've mentioned a couple of times, which is a due diligence period for the buyer to verify the information provided by the seller, which could be information put on a Form 17, could be an advertisement that the listing agent did, could be a flyer the listing agent did up, could be statements made by email from the listing agent or the seller saying that this in fact is the condition of the property. And so this is saying that the buyer gets 10 days to verify whether those statements are true or not. So we had a case called Douglas versus Visser here in Washington State, up in northeast Washington, the Blaine, Washington area, where Visser had sold a house to Douglas, and Douglas sued after closing because it turned out there was all kinds of misrepresentations and lies made by Visser, the seller. And it turned out that yes, there in fact was proof that he lied, misrepresented, but the judge said, you were given this paragraph W to verify his lies. 10 days. So why didn't you do it during those 10 days? Can't come to me now, a month after closing, no way. And threw it out. Or ruled in favor anyway of Visser. So if you're a listing agent, that's really a good thing. You're going to give that buyer 10 days to check that stuff out. Give them their due diligence. And if a listing agent, through their own ignorance of the law, wants to encourage their seller to take away that buyer's due diligence period of 10 days, wow. I mean, I just think that's so risky to do. But I guess that's their call to make. It's like a get out of jail free card, you know, in Monopoly. It's like you can sue after closing. And then the last item on this Form 21 purchase and sale contract, also the last item on Form 20, which is for multiple family, which is also on Form 23, which is for manufactured homes, which is also on Form 25, which is for vacant land, also on Form 28, which is for condominiums. This paragraph is a disclaimer saying that representations that have been made in good faith to the best of our knowledge using public records of things. And if the buyer wants to know for sure about anything about the property, they need to do their due diligence. They need to get a tape measure out, measure the square footage, or get a surveyor out to survey the property lines and things like that. And so this is something that protects you and I and the other broker and designated broker and the seller from getting sued by the buyer. It's putting the buyer on notice. You got to do your due diligence now. Check these things out now. Okay, so we don't ever want to have that crossed out. Any questions about anything in the contract, this Form 21? Or 20 or 23 or 25 or 28?
John, I'm multifamily and you have renters in the unit. Are there any forms that should be included with an offer?
Well, I think the Form 20 itself does have spaces for things like the utilities, rents, and all those kinds of things. So it doesn't?
No.
Well, I can't answer you then. I don't know.
Okay, that's all right.
I thought that it did, so I'll have to check into that. And maybe that'll be one of the classes I do on I call them specialty transactions. I just did one last Monday and on vacant land, and then I'm going to do one this coming Monday on new construction.
Yeah.
And so so that's another one I might do is multifamily. I'll check into that form again because I thought it was on there. So, okay, any other questions? Anyone have one that I can answer? Okay, well, I appreciate all of you being here for the class, and next week will be Forms Mastery 2, which is the third of the 4 I do each month, which will be on financing and on the optional clauses addendum.
Great.
So we'll see you next week, I hope.
Cool. Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.